Coming down in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider podcast. I am Hub Arkush, and our Shaw Media Group sports editor is alongside Kyle Nabors, as he is every week. Our Chicago Bears beat reporter, Sean Hammond, taking a little break this weekend. He's down catching some sun before we head to the Combine in Indianapolis. And Sean, fresh off being chosen one of the top 10 beat reporters, I believe, in the country by the Associated Press sports editors. And so getting a little fun in the sun there, Kyle. I guess you earned that after a good year's work.
Yeah, Sean's done a great job all year long on the Bears beat. It was really cool to see him recognized among the best in the nation at doing what he does, being a good beat reporter.
Yeah, he's a really talented young man and really has taken to the beat. And I didn't really see the whole thing. I was just happy to hear the announcement that he had been selected. But I think there were, of the 10, 2 Bears beat reporters. Was Dan Weeder of the Tribune included too?
Yeah, so there's different category sizes. So like ESPN, the largest newspapers and largest websites compete in the biggest group, and Dan was among those. And Dan, of course, does a great job for the Chicago Tribune.
Yeah, and yes, we do compete, but we also work and live together all year long on that beat in a small room in tight quarters, dealing with a lot of the same issues. And Dan, a good friend, I know Sean would want to congratulate him too. So for the two of them to have, two of the NFL's best right here in Chicago shouldn't surprise us. Best sports fans in the world, and now some of the best media as well. And it is interesting. Interesting year to be on the beat. We kind of recovered somewhat from the real COVID lockdowns of 2020, playing games in empty stadiums, never getting out to Hallis Hall, to where we started the year reasonably normally, allowed back at Hallis Hall at practice in the media room, albeit masked and still taking certain precautions. As the season wore on and there were outbreaks, we eventually were not able to get out, and not just us in Chicago, but all NFL teams, where media was no longer allowed in the facilities, and we went back to strictly Zoom. But fans stayed in the stands. We had probably the greatest playoffs, I think, at least in the 45 years I've been doing this, the best playoffs I've ever seen.
After I complained all season long about kind of what I thought to be a mediocre year of the NFL, then the NFL went ahead and put on fireworks all postseason, right?
Yeah, well, I think there were struggles during the year, and a lot of it was because of the balance and because of the parity, Kyle. And we saw it in the playoffs, where these teams couldn't be separated until the final play of the game. And during the regular season, while it's exciting, it gets a little tedious sometimes when you don't know who the good teams and the bad teams are. But once you're in the playoffs and you got the best and they're playing games like that, it was just great theater. And the Super Bowl was still a little different, not a full week of festivities. Of course, for the second year in a row, after it didn't happen for 54 years, 2 years in a row, you get a home team playing in the Super Bowl. But nonetheless, as we head into the offseason, and particularly getting ready to go to the Combine, which didn't happen last year, it did feel a little more normal. And this feels, I think, even more normal as far as the beginning of this offseason to anything we've seen in the last couple of years.
Definitely. Overall, just in kind of general in life, we've gotten past the Omicron surge. Mask mandates. If you're in Illinois, you're coming off here in a couple days. The NFL has kind of resumed a more normal schedule. It kind of feels like we're getting closer to everyday life that we are expected. And for the NFL and for those guys that are on the beat, that one, it makes life easier in terms of access, but it just honestly just makes life. We've all dealt with stresses at work and stuff, and that goes just up to the NFL level too with these guys on the beat. So it feels good to be there in person, to feel a little bit more normal, and that helps with our coverage, because the players feel a bit more relaxed too when it's a normal situation.
Yeah, and Kyle, I do want to be careful. I don't want this to sound wrong. We are talking strictly about the NFL and, of course, the pandemic and COVID. We are not unaware as we record, it is day 3 of war in Europe.
Some things feel more normal. Some
things
unfortunately do not.
And the only reason I bring it up is because we do football here, we do sports here. We occasionally delve off into some entertainment and try and have some fun. But we don't get into politics. It's not our place. We don't speak editorially for our newspapers as far as policy. But I think everybody can agree we certainly are all being touched by it, and all of our thoughts and prayers go to the people of Ukraine, and the hopes that sanity, will prevail in this. It's an unthinkable horror right now. But again, we're not going to get into the politics of it or choose sides. But we certainly are not belittling it, and we're not ignoring it, and wish but nothing but the best for the people of Ukraine. Bringing it back to the NFL, I think, Kyle, part of this reason of familiarity, or the reason for this familiarity that we're feeling a little bit this morning, is because, as I said, the combine is next week in Indianapolis. There was some minor turmoil around that over in the week. Some agents threatening to boycott because of some of the COVID protocols that the owners, NFL, were putting in place. There were some discussions and apparently negotiation. They settled on something that we don't know that every agent is going to be satisfied and every player is going to show up. But for the most part, the threat of the mass boycott up to 150 of the top prospects has been removed. And we do, as near as I can tell, looking at the schedule, you do have to be vaccinated and boosted to attend the combine. But other than that, it does look like it's going to be, fairly close to what we've become used to over the years. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people wearing masks. I will be, but other than that, I'm not seeing anything that is going to make this different from the combine that we've come to know and enjoy.
Yeah, it's going to feel a lot more normal from the an evaluation standpoint for both teams and the media. Getting back to normal when it comes to the combine. I know there's been a lot of talk the last couple of years. I mean, it makes things more difficult when you're trying to do pre-draft analysis and you haven't seen these guys in person. So
well, I mean, the combine does exist for a reason, and not having seen them in person, watch tape, and that's where the most important evaluation does come from. Don't let anybody kid you. You talk to the most successful evaluators, drafters, team builders, personnel directors. They will tell you can't replace what these guys do in games, and that happens on tape. Sometimes you get a better feel for it when your scouts are on the road and you see these kids playing live. But teams that dramatically alter their scouting reports and their draft boards once the college season is over and games are no longer being played, historically fail. At the end of the day, this is about how good of football players these guys are, but the combine is the first chance to get them all together in one place, compare them side by side, get to know them personally. That's something you cannot get during the season, and the all-important physicals, the medicals. That is, you have a group of doctors there. Teams bring their own doctors as well for kids they're particularly interested in. But this is where you really start to understand now, not only how good they were in college, but if, excuse me, there are any physical reasons or restrictions that they might not be able to continue to develop and develop fully in the NFL. That, and again, the one-on-one interview, starting to understand who these young men are, starting to know something about them as people, finding your leaders, finding your followers, finding guys who, to the best of your ability to read them, have the kind of heart and intelligence you're looking for, and other guys who may not come across all that well and sometimes can scare you away a little bit.
You bringing up the injury, getting a chance to go through the physicals brings me to one of my least favorite times of the year, after the combine, when we start hearing the reports of what was found, and we have to sort through what's noise and what's legitimate.
Yeah, I mean, it hurts. It hurts some of these young men.
It does.
It drops their draft status. It costs them a lot of money. Eventually, if you're a top prospect, you're going to get a chance to play somewhere. And so, rarely does anything that pops out in the physical cost or end a career. It's happened, but it doesn't happen often. One of the most interesting ones that I recall, this goes back about, I'm going to guess 7-8 years now, but Maurice Hurst was a top defensive tackle coming out of the University of Michigan. I recall this one because I'm a Michigan alum, and it has nothing to do with it being Michigan. It was just, an unfortunate story. And they discovered it wasn't an irregular heartbeat. I forget what it was, but something in his physical showed up that there could be an issue with his heart. And this is a young man who had played, 4 years at one of the top football schools in the country. He was one of the top defensive tackles in the country. He went from a first-round pick to, I believe it was a 4th or a 5th-round pick. He is still in the league. Ended up he didn't become an All-Pro, but he has had a solid NFL career. And yet the difference between that first round contract and that fourth or fifth round contract is you're talking about 8, 9, 10 million guaranteed, regardless of where in the round you fall. And that's the kind of thing that you just hate to see happen to these guys.
Yeah, and it happens every year. A lot of times it's not. We've seen over the years. You said it wasn't a regular heartbeat, but that has cropped up a few times. You hear a lot of back issues that all of a sudden get found out about during this. Less so on the knees, but definitely backs tend to be the big one.
They're actually going to find broken bones that were never discovered and healed by themselves. They're going to find ligaments that are still torn. Every once in a while, you get a guy whose ACL is torn and he never knew. Sometimes it's a combination of what nerves it touches and how much pain it causes, and then the threshold of pain. And I'm not saying some of these guys are, tougher or braver than others. It's just, it does hit people differently. Different people have different thresholds of pain or what they consider pain. And sometimes it has masked injuries, and it all comes out in these physicals. And then what's really interesting is you get the doctors competing, and so, one doctor sees this, another doctor sees it, but thinks it has a different impact or different, ramifications. And so, but it is invaluable because it really gives these teams, each team starts basically with 7 picks every year. And there are always, 300 to 400 NFL level prospects, and finding your 7 out of those 300 or 400, or 5 or 9 if you've traded around and acquired picks. These are really valuable assets, and that's why they want to be so careful with these physicals.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a good amount of questions starting to build up here, Hub. We want to dive in?
I think we should. This is kind of a free show this week, guys. We're going to get into some specifics with the Combine and the Bears, but for the most part, not a lot of breaking news as we wait for the Combine. So let's hear what's on everybody's mind. And Kyle, I'll let you decide who gets to go first.
Well, we got a couple questions from Gary Ross here, and I'm going to do them back to back. But before we get into the player stuff, we're going to go. He's got a question that you can probably talk a lot more about than I can here. But Gary asked, Hub, what do you think of the complete overhaul of the strength and conditioning staff?
I think, Gary, it's part of the coaching staff, and it's not unusual. It happens often, probably most of the time when a new coach is hired. He wants somebody that he knows he's comfortable with. I think the fact that in this case they brought back somebody who's had tremendous success here in the past with Lovie Smith when Jim Arthur was here. Now, I am not qualified to evaluate or judge or rank strength and conditioning coaches. We don't actually get to see the program in action. We tend to look at a team that suffers a number of injuries, and
like soft tissue injuries.
Yeah,
tend to get attributed to that.
Exactly. And people go for the strength and conditioning guy, but the reality is that sometimes strength and conditioning doesn't have much impact on certain soft tissue injuries. So, but it's certainly an important part of every NFL team. They've put together a respected group, and we have to hope they'll do well. I do like the fact that this is a group that was here, the last time the Bears went to a Super Bowl. He was the coach under Lovie Smith, and Lovie, had the best run of any Bears coach in history other than Mike Ditka and George Halas. I got that wrong. Other than George Halas and Mike Ditka. I should probably be careful with how I do that. So, Gary, it's promising, but to try and really say, thumbs up or thumbs down would be impossible.
All right. Now, here's a question from Gary I can answer.
Do we think that we will hear from Ryan Poles of what he currently thinks of the current Bears O-line players? For example, can Jenkins play left or Whitehair move back to center? Or do you have to sign or draft? Gary, I think that he will talk about where he's at on the offensive line. We will read into it. He will not, nor should he, call out individual players. Now, when specific to your questions, Jenkins right or left is certainly that's open, for discussion. That's something that he should at least tell us what he's thinking, and now whether that's going to happen this coming week at the Combine when we get to visit with him, whether we're not going to know until they get to minicamp, and they're going to get an extra veteran minicamp because they have a new head coach. We may not find out for another month or two, but yeah, at some point we're going to know what they think about Jenkins and where he fits best. It's interesting. You talk about Whitehair moving back to center. If they re-sign James Daniels, I can't imagine that they wouldn't leave Whitehair where he is, where he was drafted to play. Remember, he was a center by emergency need only, because Hronis Grasu tore his ACL in training camp his rookie year. James Daniels, if you re-sign him, is the guy that you would consider moving back to center. And I want to be careful here, Kyle. People act like Sam Mustipher is a revolving door or a hole in the offensive line. Sam Mustipher is not that bad. I mean, this is not the biggest issue on the Chicago Bears. Mustipher is limited physically, and so there's some things that he's never going to do. But he's also still a young player who's improved every year, who does an outstanding job with the line calls, is extremely smart and tough. And it wouldn't be stunning. I'd say it's no better than 50-50. They're going to have a different center this year. You can upgrade the position. He's limited athletically. He's never going to be the best center in the league. James Daniels has that kind of ceiling, so if I was going to make a move, it would be with Daniels, certainly not Whitehair.
Yeah, I mean, you go into this off season, and well, I guess first off, I do want to go ahead and plug. We are working on our report card series, and Sean did the interior offensive line, and it was funny. We bring up Sam Mustipher. He had a graph. I can't remember where it was from. I don't have it right in front of me right now, but it essentially charted all the centers across the league, across the x-axis and the y-axis, and if you're in the top right corner, that means you're really damn good. And if you're in the bottom left corner, you're below average. Sam Mustipher was literally where the X and Y axis intersect, which means he was completely league average, which sounds about right? And so the analytics back that up. There's a lot of people that seem to really want to pile on Sam Mustipher. They could upgrade the position. There's just other areas that they need to upgrade over that. And particularly if you bring James Daniel back, and this really is the $1 million question going into the offseason, is how they arrange the interior of that offensive line. Because once we figure that out, that's going to dictate what they do at the tackle position. It's really going to dictate how they spend their money across the board this offseason, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Sean did the interior, I did the tackles, and in doing the tackles, these pieces are all archived at shawlocal.com if you want to get the position by position review, because each one comes with a plan for 2022. And when I wrote the tackles, I said, what I would do if I was Ryan Poles is free agency is rich with veteran quality tackles, all of who've played on the left side. Teron Armstead has been an all-pro. He's 31 years old. The Saints are $80 million over the cap. I don't know how they're going to re-sign him. Cam Robinson is a younger version at 27, not an all-pro, but a pretty good left tackle in Jacksonville. They franchised him last year. I don't know what they'll do this year. Then you look at Trent Brown and Orlando Brown. Eric Fisher, a guy that when Ryan Poles was in Kansas City, they made the #1 overall pick in the draft. He's probably a notch below an Armstead or a Trent Brown, but has been very good when surrounded, with good offensive talent. I would go get one of those guys, lock down the left side, the blind side of my young quarterback who I'm trying to develop, who holds the ball too long and who doesn't get rid of it quickly enough, and protect him. And if you do that, you move Jenkins back to the right side, where I personally clearly think he believes. You kick Larry Borum inside to guard, which is where some teams had him rated as a day 2 draft pick, thinking that was going to be his position in the NFL. Then I do re-sign James Daniels. I put him at center. I've got Mustipher for depth. But now, if you had Teron Armstead at left tackle and Jenkins at right tackle, and you had Cody Whitehair and Larry Borum at guard, and possibly Daniels at center, the makings of a pretty good offensive line, and that's one signing. That's one free agent, not using any of your draft capital. So there's different ways to go. That's what I'd like to see them do. They've got the cap room to make a couple decent-sized moves, and so Armstead, wouldn't be out of the question. He has been banged up a little bit the last couple of years, so you got to be careful there. We get back to the physicals. It may be that a Trent Brown or a Cam Robinson is a better option, but these guys are all going to get paid to different degrees. And other than Robinson, I guess Orlando Brown is still pretty young too, but the other three are middle-aged. They're going to get nice contracts, but they're not going to break the bank. So I think this is something the Bears should take a look at.
Well, I'm looking here. I mean, I definitely think the Bears are going to look at left tackle and free agency. It was funny. You hit Cam Robinson and Orlando Brown Jr. Throw this up there. Mark was asking about those two guys. I think any of those names you mentioned are in a possibility. Orlando Brown Jr., he was traded from Baltimore to Kansas City last offseason. Hub played pretty well there. I haven't looked into the Kansas City cap situation. Is he someone that could be franchised?
Well, you can always, yeah. I mean, the Chiefs are not in that much trouble that they couldn't manipulate things and afford a franchise tag. The thing about Orlando Brown Jr. of the group of the five that I mentioned, though, he really had been a right tackle. He was drafted to play right tackle in Baltimore. Ronnie Stanley got hurt last year, went down, and they moved Brown over. He played well on the left side, but his ultimate upside really seems to be at right tackle of this group. Now, if they believe Teven Jenkins is a left tackle, you could sign the right tackle. I mean, lock down one of those positions and kick Borum inside because he can play anywhere up and down the line. But they've struggled at left tackle for so long and so badly that I'd rather see them go get a proven left tackle. So, when you say could they, do they target them? I don't know. But there's five tackles worth talking about. This is two of them, and these are the two younger ones. And so, in that regard, now they may be a little more expensive though because they're younger. So that's part of the deal too.
The other thing I'll ask here, for your opinion on Hub, is obviously Teven Jenkins had the setback with the back injury and then got on the field and was, I mean, what's the best way to categorize it? Rusty, or at least
he didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah,
he was Justin Fields at tackle. I mean, when you play these rookies, now usually tackles figure it out quicker than quarterbacks, but he didn't get on he had no training camp. He didn't get on the field until week 10 or week 9?
Somewhere, it might have been even later than that. It might have been about week 12. So I guess my question, or what I wanted your analysis on there was, while he struggled once he did get on the field, Larry Borum really excelled out there at tackle position when James Peters was out. So we talk about the potential Larry Borum kicking back inside. Do you think there's a chance, considering his success outside, that the Bears might say that, hey, we want to stick there and see how that develops?
I wouldn't have a problem with that. I want to be careful with the use of excelled though. He surprised, I think, is a better word than excelled. Yeah, I mean, excelling at left tackle is that's pretty hard to do. But the fact that he carried himself well and didn't look out of place and didn't make any big mistakes for a rookie who'd never played the position was really impressive. But more than that, it's just when you look at him, I watched tape of him at Mizzou, and he was a big, sloppy brawler. I mean,
you loved him coming out of Mizzou.
I did. Well, and it was because of I think I've talked a little bit about this. NFL prospects now have these training camps they go to by position. And there are certain guys, there are the quarterback gurus, there's the offensive line gurus. Charles Bentley, the former Pro Bowl center, I believe it was in Cleveland for a number of years, holds a camp in Arizona every year for interior offensive linemen that is it's like going to Harvard for offensive guards, and there's another guy named Paul Alexander who they have on the NFL Network a lot. And I believe he has a website or at least a Twitter follow that you can get into. Alexander's really good. And I had heard him talking about Borum after I'd watched some tape on him. And he said at the time that, because he did play tackle in Missouri, he said he's going to be a Pro Bowl mauling right tackle in the NFL. But then what happened is between his last game at Missouri, and it was in progress at the combine that didn't really exist. Remember, they had some players, but there was no media. We didn't see any of these guys. But then by the time he showed up after the draft, I don't know if the Bears knew this when they used a 5th-round pick on him, because even the old big sloppy guy at 340 or 350 was worth more than a 5th-round pick. He had dropped 30 pounds and converted probably another 20 pounds of flab to muscle, and showed up with a different body and not carrying all that extra weight, showed some athleticism from the first rookie minicamp that nobody expected to see. And by the time he got in with the veterans, he was holding his own. And I got to tell you, if they don't decide to do more at the position, if they figure they'll just use a late draft choice and continue to build depth, I prefer Borum on the left side than Jenkins. From what we've seen of the two of them so far, I just don't know that either one of them gets you to the elite left tackle level that you'd like to be if you're going to have an elite quarterback.
Yeah, and it leaves you really thin. If it doesn't work out, you're probably going to struggle. So I do think the Bears are going to add a tackle in free agency. Question here. Well, first off, before I get to CJ's question about linebacker, he chimed in about Orlando Brown Jr. Brown has said he wants to stay on the left side like his father, a bone of contention in Baltimore. I haven't seen that, but that may be true. That may just be the fact that typically left tackles tend to get paid more in free agency than right tackles. So you may be saying that publicly just to drive up his price.
Yeah, well, CJ's right. This was talked about in Baltimore. He played well on the left side. His father is a good, I don't want to say excuse, a good reason, I guess I should
Yeah.
say. But it was pretty clear that it was about money because left tackles get paid more than right tackles. He had finished his third year in the league. He had played well on the left side. He knew with Ronnie Stanley, who was kind of the franchise left side and should be, is one of the better young left tackles in the league when healthy, he was going to be the guy in Baltimore. He asked Baltimore for a trade, and that's when they worked out the deal with Kansas City. But that doesn't mean that his ceiling is as high on the left side as is on the right side. And so, whatever team he gets paid by is the team that's going to decide which side he pays on. So, CJ, you're correct. I just don't think he's quite as good on the left side as he is on the right side, although he's young enough that does remain to be seen.
All right, CJ's question about linebackers. How about let you take this away?
CJ says, I know you guys have started to look at the roster. Is there any free agent inside linebacker to look at, or would drafting one be best? CJ is referring to the series that Kyle mentioned a few minutes ago at shawlocal.com. We're doing positional reviews and report cards position by position. Getting near the end, actually. Most of them are already posted at shawlocal.com if you want to go look at any of them. I believe I've got inside linebackers coincidentally going up today, CJ. So it'll be at the website later today. And I did just take a look at it. Linebacker is an interesting position, Kyle, because this is where the biggest impact of switching from the 3-4 to the 4-3 comes. When you were in a 3-4, your outside linebackers were Robert Quinn and Khalil Mack. Now, in switching to a 4-3, you have this incredible good fortune and bonus on the front end in that both Robert Quinn and Khalil Mack have been all pros playing as 40 front defensive ends with a hand on the ground. They've done them both. As a matter of fact, last year was the first time Quinn spent an entire year as an outside rush backer in a 3-4 defense. So it was literally, well, I should say his first year in Chicago, last year, 2 seasons ago now.
Yeah, we kind of forget about that first year in Robert Quinn in Chicago.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons. The 4-3 switch, the Bears they're going to be really intriguing up front if they re-sign Bilal Nichols, because I think he's made to be a 3 technique. He's been playing out of position in the 30 front. And now with 2 all-pro defensive ends, with a potential playmaker at the 3 technique, you have to assume that they're not going to re-sign Akeem Hicks. But even with Angelo Blackson and Kairos Tonga to play that anchor tackle, Eddie Goldman can play that anchor tackle if he's not a cap casualty, although I think he will be. So the line looks really good. But what it does to linebacker is now you need 3 linebackers. You don't know if Roquan is going to stay inside or move outside to the will. We think he probably will move out to the will. That's where Matt Eberflus had his best player in Indianapolis, and Darius Leonard. That's where Lance Briggs played. That's where Derek Brooks played. So we're assuming that'll happen. So you need 2 more starting linebackers. You need the Mike and the Sam. You look at the rest of the guys on the roster, and nobody's there. I mean, Alec Ogletree is a free agent. Danny Trevathan, it's hard. He's under contract, but it's just hard to see Danny, passing a physical at this point after the last couple of years. And there is a $3 million cap savings if he doesn't, or if you decide to move on. That's not a post-June 1 cut. So, even though you've got those 2 under contract, and then you add no, he's not. I was going to say, Caleb Johnson, the undrafted rookie free agent from last year, who was interesting. And I think we'll probably get a look at that Sam spot. He might even get a look at the Mike spot, but it's really hard to project a bottom of the roster guy to the starting lineup. And so now, the free agents, Alec Ogletree, of course, is a free agent. Joel Ayebuniwe, who's never really panned out as a 4th round pick, is going to be a free agent. The guys you brought in late, Cassius Marsh and Bruce Irvin, who aren't really factors, are free agents. And then Christian Jones, who's one of your most valuable guys who can play inside or out, is a free agent. So I would really like to see him re-sign Jones, only because he is so versatile in a 4-3 and can be your 4th linebacker. But as far as the 2 starters inside, you've got Alex Anzalone. It would be an economical move. He, of course, went to the Lions last year and was their leading defender. Anthony Barr can play that Sam spot. I don't think he would play the Mike. He's a 30-year-old free agent from the Minnesota Vikings. And there's a few other guys, that I wrote up who are interesting. Quan Alexander, is intriguing. He's a free agent who could definitely play the Mike or the Sam, although he is also a 3-4 guy. But he's still young. He's only 28 years old, and he's a hell of an athlete. So, and there's one other really good name that I'm forgetting at the moment. I don't have the list in front of me. But yes, I think I could see them. We don't know what Ryan Pohl's style is going to be, though. Is he looking for these undiscovered talents, which is what Ryan Pace did? I mean, nobody had any clue what the Bears were getting in Akeem Hicks, is a perfect example. And Mario Edwards Jr. is another one. Now, a lot of these guys had some New Orleans connections, and so you look at some of the Kansas City connections. They can address it in free agency. It's also a position where you sometimes, if you're talking about Mike, if you're talking about middle linebacker, often the best one in the draft is still sitting there in the 40s and 50s. These guys tend to become second, third round picks. They're not as valued in the first round as the 3-4 linebackers are. So my guess is they'll look at it both ways in free agency and the draft. But I think they may probably try and address it with a less expensive pick. Juwan Bentley is another guy who played 65% of the snaps for the Patriots this year on one of the top defenses in the league. Just isn't well known, but a 26-year-old. So I'd look for one of those kind of names possibly to be, similar to the kind of signing Angelo Blackson was last year. I guess is the comp I would look for in terms of the level or quality of player they might look for at that position in free agency.
I think that's a good analysis, Hub. I don't expect them to break the bank at that position. They're going to have to bring in some bodies. I think bringing back Christian Jones would be a terrific idea. I think you can probably bring back Alec Ogletree at a reasonable price to build some depth. I don't think it's someone that you want to rely on as a starter, but as a 4th or 5th linebacker, I don't think that's a bad idea.
No, I mean, you've got these interesting decisions. You can go back to tackle for a minute. It's almost unthinkable because he's 40 years old. But the way Jason Peters played last year, if he wanted to go one more year and you were staying, planning on Jenkins and Bourne being your bookend tackles for the future, I think you'd have to think about that. I mean, he stayed healthy all year long with no off-season training. I don't think they will, again, because he's 40 years old. And so now you come to the linebacker spot. Ogletree's only 31. Ogletree ended up the second leading tackler on the football team. He was actually tied for 3rd in passes defensed and tied for 4th in tackles for loss. He played well. And knowing that you need quantity as well as quality here, and he gives you a little bit of both, I'd like to see them consider it. But, you got a new coaching staff, you got a new front office, and they want their guys. That's just the reality of when these regime changes happen.
And you look at it too, the Bears don't have a lot of draft picks. We talk about them spending potentially, I expect them to spend fairly big at one position. I think that's going to be offensive tackle. And then you're going to see more across the board, kind of middle of the pack, I guess, signings. Whether that's at cornerback, safety, inside linebacker, wide receiver. I mean, they need to bring in multiple wide receivers. They need multiple tight ends, or at least one starting caliber tight end, I think. That can play, 60 to 70% of snaps. I don't expect there to be a lot of big names, particularly when, the question was about linebacker. I do not expect there to be a big signing at linebacker.
The advantage of free agency, you should never address need in the draft. If you're drafting a player who you don't have as good a scouting report on as 3 or 4 other guys, but this guy fills a need and you take him, teams do it all the time. And again, that's a great way to fail in the draft. You should always be drafting the best available football player. That's the advantage of free agency. In free agency, you can go out and address need because these are NFL veterans. You have a much better handle on what you're getting. So, let's take a step back here, Kyle, and realize the first key, the Bears have a lot of free agents, but we assume Allen Robinson won't be back. We assume Akeem Hicks won't be back. We assume Jason Peters won't be back. Tayshaun Gibson's 32 years old, played really well for 2 years with the Bears. I don't know what they're thinking there. Bilal Nichols and James Daniels are still young, ascending players. And then there's Alec Ogletree. These 4 guys, all starters, become the key to the Bears' offseason plan. Because if you bring back Daniels and Nichols, which those I'll just go out and say, I hope they do. I think it would be a mistake not to. At least now you're not trying to fill starting spots at guard and 3 technique.
Yeah,
I'd like to see Gibson and Ogletree back, but now age comes into play, and I don't know what they're thinking there. But once those 4 decisions are made, then you have to get at least 2 starting receivers. We talk about 3 starting wideouts in the NFL these days. Darnell Mooney's the only starting receiver on your roster. So you need 2 starting quality wide receivers. Even if you do re-sign your own free agents, you're going to need at least 1 more starting linebacker, even if you do keep your own free agents. And you're going to need probably 1 more starting cornerback if you do keep your own free agents. So, and then if you don't keep your own free agents, you need more. But what we know right now, even if they decide to bring back people that we deem worthy of coming back, wide receiver, outside linebacker, Sam linebacker, and cornerback are critical needs. And so that's where you should probably assume they may focus the most assets.
Yeah, so we got a couple comments and questions from Thomas Klein. He had earlier asked about wide receivers in the draft and if they can have an impact on rookies. And we'll talk about that in a second, but he had followed it up here. Probably on the comment about where I thought the best chance for the Bears to spend big was at tackle, because he was talking about wide receiver. I don't see how they get through this offseason without giving significant money to a wide receiver. They need a number one, and I think it would be a mistake to count on a rookie to fill that role. So I'll say that I do expect the Bears to sign multiple guys at wide receiver, or multiple players at wide receiver. I just don't know if there's anyone out there that is worthy of a big time number one. Obviously Devontae Adams, but the Bears aren't going that route. Like Mike Williams, I think he'd be a good fit for the Bears, but I don't think you're giving Mike Williams a huge amount of money, right?
Well, Mike Williams, may be a number one, and he's still in, just at the high end of those mid-20s. So yeah, I think he's going to get paid. Tom, it's funny, you picked the wrong year to take that stance. I mean, the rookie wide receivers may have never had a bigger impact on the league than they did this year. Starts with Jamar Chase, obviously. Actually, you go back to last year and this year. Now Justin Jefferson in the second year, but 1,000-yard receiver as a rookie. You look at what Jalen Waddle did. I mean, these guys. Yes, rookie wide receivers can immediately become number ones, or at least produce like a number two with number one ceilings and abilities. So, don't assume that they can't get what they need in the draft. And a lot of times these guys do come from the second and third round. Don't ignore that possibility either. There's a free agent, Juju Smith-Schuster, second round draft pick. There's a bunch of, some of the best of all time are second and third rounders. So you can do it both ways, but because you need at least 2, I tend to agree that there's going to be one free agent and either a second or a third round draft pick. Again, now when we talk about spending big, they can't, Allen Robinson is 28 years old. Allen Robinson says he wants to stay in Chicago. Nobody is going to even talk to him about what he was demanding from the Bears last year. So I don't know where that one's going to fall. And Robinson is such a class kid that even this new regime, if they get to know him and they figure out that it's in everybody's best interest to bring him back, on a 1 year or a shorter term, I don't know, how that's going to work out. But if not, there's plenty of guys. Mike Williams is going to get a lot of money. Devontae Adams may not even be the highest paid because he's 30 years old. Some of these other guys are 26 and 27. Chris Godwin.
Godwin's going to get paid.
Well, except he's got an ACL right now. And so that's
I guess I should say if he comes back, if he comes back healthy. Sorry, I had an echo going. If teams determine that everything went okay with the ACL injury and they feel comfortable with it, I guess I should say that I expect him to get paid pretty well.
I think he's going to get paid pretty well, Kyle, but there's no way that anybody's going to know between now and August 1st where he's at on the rehab trail, because that injury came, remember, later in the season. Surgery couldn't have happened before December, and you look at a Tariq Cohen who now, 16 months out, still never got back. He's the exception. I know a lot of these guys are getting back. Look at David Bakhtiari, though. Bakhtiari, there's an interesting one because Bakhtiari tore the ACL in the last game of the 2020 season. Goodwin tore the ACL, I think it was like week 15, week 14. So within a few weeks, okay? Bakhtiari was hoping to make it back for the playoffs and couldn't do it, was activated and didn't get it done. Now, again, a lot of other guys do better. Bakhtiari's carrying 320 pounds on that ACL, which Goodwin won't be. but you don't know is the point. So he's too good to get left out there. He's gonna have offers. A lot of this is going to depend on him and his camp and his agent and what they're thinking, because they may want to not get tied to a long-term deal, prove that he's 100%, and then get back in the market next year. But when you look at the top guys out there, the names, it's Chris Godwin, it's Devontae Adams, it's Mike Williams, and then a bunch of really good ones. But those three are a notch above. Will Fuller has shown that kind of ability, but the injuries just keep on happening. Sammy Watkins is a 1.5 or a 2. I really like Christian Kirk, but he's not as big as I would like. I know you're a DJ Chark guy, but these guys are
Michael Gallup.
They're a notch below. Yeah, Gallup. I mean, they're all they're talents.
There's someone else on. You met Juju Smith-Schuster. You mentioned earlier too. Another name that is going to be intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a few older guys. I mean, does Matt Eberflus want to bring T.Y. Hilton here on a 2-year deal? Now he is. He's not. Well, I mean, no, Nick. I mean, he's a great.
I mean, he was a great wide receiver.
I'm not saying I want him to do that. I'm just saying these are the things that we're just not sure of right now. One thing that would be wise this team is young on offense, middle-aged to aging on defense, and at some point over the next year or two in this new regime, they're going to want to sync that up. They're going to want to get younger on defense and better on offense. And so in this first year, getting, some slightly older players on shorter term deals that don't strangle the cap in the next year or two wouldn't be the worst philosophy. But, we're going to get to talk to Ryan Poles again on Tuesday. I realize I don't know when you guys listen to this podcast. So it's actually Tuesday, March 1st, we will be meeting, we being the Chicago media, will be meeting with Ryan Poles, maybe get a little, we'll talk to Matt Eberflus that day as well, maybe get a little better sense of what their philosophy is, but it's not something that they want to share with the other 31 teams as they get ready to compete, in free agency and the draft. So we're really going to have to wait and watch this process this year to get a better feel for what their philosophy and what their strategies are. It's going to be the toughest year to predict with them that we've had since, Matt Nagy arrived 4 years ago.
Yeah. And just one more thing about wide receiver. I honestly have just started kind of doing my research on the draft. But it does appear that wide receiver is pretty deep and that there's going to be some interesting names available in the second round for the Bears. And as we saw, and as you mentioned earlier, Hub, you don't have to have a first round pick to hit at wide receiver in the NFL right now. I mean, there's going to be guys that can make an instant impact next year available at the Bears, to the Bears at pick 39?
I think it's 39. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Kyle, we will, beginning next Friday, when Sean and I have returned from the combine, start using names, at various positions. I'm loath to do it because the lists, I mean, I've got my initial list and I know how different it's going to be from the list.
It's going to change an incredible amount in a week.
But what we do know is the other interesting thing about the point that Kyle just made is that not only wide receiver and edge rusher are the two strongest and deepest positions at the top in this draft, but amongst these wide receivers, there's 2 or 3 kids who would seem to be certain first-round picks who have serious injuries, and you don't know what that's going to do. At least one of those guys is going to drop down into the second round, and so there could be a player sitting there at 39 at wide receiver with 15 to 25 talent that because of the injury he falls down. Now it becomes your appetite for risk. Again, there's so much to learn about Ryan Poles, but there are plenty of possibilities as to how the Bears address the needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Head over to cornerback here and wrap it up there. I think that we hit the 45-minute mark. Gary had a question about what kind of corners do we target free agency or draft, but he also had this interesting thought, Hub. I want to throw it up here for you.
Well, when you say as a cover 2 corner, I mean, Kyle Fuller was an all-pro. He can do pretty much anything you want. And in his prime here in Chicago, he was a lockdown cover corner, So he did not play as well in Denver. Now let's not forget that, it was a better off season with COVID, but still somewhat truncated. And it was Vic Fangio's system, but new teammates, new defense. there is this misnomer that he ended up on the bench. That is not true. He still played, I think, almost 70% of the snaps. But in drafting Patrick Surtain, they got a guy that they think is going to be a Pro Bowler and All Pro. Ronald Darby, I believe, was playing really well for them. And Kyle's the blush was off the rose. He is 30 years old, 31 years old. I heard some things after that cap move was made. Same thing with the Charles Leno move, that there were some other minor concerns when they decided to let these guys move on. Leno, I believe, is a free agent too. Actually, I could be wrong.
I think they gave him an extension.
Did he get an extension? Yeah,
I think they gave him an extension.
That was his reward for almost getting Ryan Fitzpatrick killed. Yeah, you look at everything, and Fuller was well liked in that locker room, especially by the young corners. He played his best football here. He would be an upgrade over what they have right now. He isn't going to get big money, and whatever history there may have been, good or bad, with Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy is gone. I know his teammates liked him, so it's an interesting question, Gary. I think you consider everything. Now, again, there are young. If you want to go big at cornerback, Levi Wallace of Buffalo, I think, is really interesting. The obviously the main one is Jackson from New England, who should have been first team All Pro. He was second team. He's 27 years old, and the Patriots tend to let these guys hit the market. We'll see what happens there. The last guy they didn't let hit the market, Stephon Gilmore, is a free agent now. He's 32 years old, but he's also a former Defensive Player of the Year. So, Gary, if you're talking about just a 1 or 2 year transition thing, I don't think they're ready to give up on Kindle Vildor, nor should they be. He did not fail miserably. He struggled. There is a difference. He showed flashes of playing well there. He struggled at times. They know they have a good one in Jalen Johnson. How good is the only question there. But their corner is always a fairly deep position in the draft, too. Where the Bears are really hamstrung here is with just the 5 picks. The 2 and the 3 are the only ones that, a lot of teams do well in the 4th round. You want to have a 1st round pick every year. Very few do as well in the 5th round as Ryan Pace did. That's unusual. And so, they got 2 5s, but not Pace here to make those picks. And then a 6. They don't even have the 7th, So that is probably going to force them to be more active in free agency than they might prefer. And because of their cap situation, while they have room, Kyle, they're not struggling at all. It could push them to make some of these shorter, less commitment type deals. And that would lead to some older, not old, but older veterans. And so I don't think you can rule Fuller out.
I said that would definitely open the door for someone like Kyle Fuller, who at 30 years old and coming off a down year, I guess, by his standards. I agree with you. I don't think he played poorly in Denver, but at his age and the position, he's someone you can probably get on a 1, if not a 1, a 2 or 3 year deal, if you decide to go there out. And I don't think it's going to cost you a ton of money. I do think it helps that there was a regime change. I think the odds would be less if Ryan Pace was still in control with the way things ended in Chicago for Kyle Fuller. So I think that's a definite possibility. There was one other name I don't think you mentioned that I like that would probably cost a little bit more money. He's on the younger side, but Carlton Davis down in Tampa Bay is set to be a free agent. I think he'd be a good fit, but I do think he, as a younger free agent, is probably has one of the top potentials. Him and J.C. Jackson, who you did mention, I think both of those guys are probably going to get decent money.
They're going to get real money. I mean, and particularly Jackson. Davis will get paid too. Probably not, well, definitely not to the level of Jackson. The other thing to keep in mind is that probably the position least affected by the difference between a 3-4 and a 4-3 is cornerback. I mean, you get your coverages set, you play them, you're playing press, you're playing zone, you're playing man-to-man. There is some perception that the pass rush may be better and may help the corners more with one or the other. But again, that depends on the front 7. So, but it also is worth noting that defensive coordinator Alan Williams is a secondary coach by trade. That's in addition to being the defensive coordinator, that's where he's made his bones in the league. And so my guess is he's going to have as much or more input as anybody into what they do at the position.
In Indianapolis, his work there, Indianapolis has done a really good job in their secondary without spending a lot of money on it. Honestly, they've used some veterans to plug holes and develop some young guys, and it's worked out pretty well for them.
The one guy they made a huge commitment to was Malik Hooker with first round draft choice, and then he couldn't stay healthy.
Yeah.
And other than that, they've plugged in. I mean, these are good football players, but they've been, day 2 mid-round draft picks. They've been free agents, and the defense has been very good.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up here. But we had Clyde just jumped in, another regular here, and he had a question about the Combine Hub that you are well suited to answer here. So we'll close it out on this.
Yeah, Kwai, you'll be our last today. It says, gentlemen, I got my ticket for the Combine last night. Can you tell me if activities really run to 11 p.m. and where do people eat afterwards? Kwai, I am not a dining aficionado. I tend to lay low at these events, but Elmo Steakhouse is the place that everybody talks about in Indianapolis. That's where everybody in the NFL will be one night during the draft. It's probably already late to get tables there, but if you can get into Elmo Steakhouse, you want to have the shrimp and the famous cocktail sauce as well as their steaks. When you say do activities really run to 11 p.m., I've never really, it's just it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, maybe they did it for 2 years, was the first time they added fans in the activities, and it's a lesser NFL experience type event. If it says it's open till 11, I guess it is. It's not something that I've observed all that much. And then as far as the ability to actually watch workouts, that's a bit limited as well. I can tell you that whatever the schedule says is what I would trust. And, the best I can do for you on the dining front is Elmo's. There's other places in town, obviously.
I've spent some time in Indianapolis. I can't remember the name of the street. It's the street that runs essentially. It runs into the stadium, not the football stadium, the basketball stadium. I can't remember. Is it Bankers Field? I can't remember the name of it. But whatever that street is, it's hard to miss. It's lit up really well. It's kind of the tourist area in downtown Indianapolis. But there's a ton of good restaurants to try down there.
Yeah, I believe it's the Capitol building that is right there near the arena. I want to say I'm not even sure if Indianapolis is the Capitol, but there's some state government buildings there, and the basketball arena is there. It's the center of downtown.
It's not a big downtown area, so
no,
yeah. I mean, you can walk it. My wife and I actually did a tandem bike one spring down there, which was interesting.
Yeah, there's a couple good microbreweries. I want to say the Yard House is one of them. I know there's a Rock Bottom Brewery there, which is more of a chain type deal. There was a Champ. So, unfortunately, a lot of these restaurants, I don't even know from year to year, the last couple of years, what's still there. But depending quite on where you're staying, it is a very compacted downtown area. And there is some fun nightlife. I'm not going to pretend that we don't hit the bars when we're done working and have a few beers, but we tend to keep those spots quieter. So I can't share any of those. Although I will tell you the real hot spot, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's the House Casual Restaurant at the Marriott, at the JW Marriott, which is the main headquarters hotel, and that's actually connected to Lucas Oil, where all the events in the convention center, it's all connected. But that restaurant / bar is hopping every night until 1, 2 in the morning. I don't know what they're closing their liquor license is, but you will definitely see a lot of NFL folks in there.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's go ahead and get out of here, Hub.
All right. Yeah, we want to thank everybody as always. We want to remind you, if you are listening as a podcast, we actually do this as a live YouTube broadcast. We use a StreamYard link. If you go to YouTube or you go to any of our Twitter handles, at Kyle Nabors, at Hub _Arkush, at Sean _Hammond, you can get into the broadcast as we go every Friday morning at 9:30 Chicago time. If not, if you prefer just to listen to the podcast, that's fine. But be sure to go to iTunes or the App Store on your phone or your computer and download a subscription. You can get that at shawlocal.com as well. The reason we love to have you join us live is you can you give us questions and comments and participate in the podcast. And today you were a huge help as Sean and I were down our third Amigo. Kyle and I were down our third Amigo with Sean taking a few days in the sun. So thank you all so much for listening this week. We will be fresh back from the Combine next week and really ready to dive into some of these prospects, know more about free agency as well. We'll have had another visit with, by the way, we tend to talk Bears here because we're located in Chicago, but our Pro Football Weekly sister, we cover the entire NFL. We will talk to pretty much every head coach and GM in the league at the Combine. Not all of them talk. 95% of them do. Bill Belichick does. You'd think he might be the one who doesn't, but he has most years. We'll see if he does this year. So we're going to have the offseason kicked off with a bang next week, and our first follow-up will be a week from today, 9:30 next Friday morning. Be sure and join us. Until then, thanks for listening this week, and we hope everybody has a great week.